Long before anyone could remember, humans had been known across the stars as fierce, unstoppable warriors. They had fought battles that shook whole systems, wars that decided the future of entire galaxies. Their ships once filled the skies like storm clouds, and their courage had become the stuff of legend. But that was ages ago. Time passed, empires rose and fell, and slowly the fire of humankind faded into quietness. Now most of the galaxy only knew humans as explorers, merchants, and settlers. They traveled peacefully from one world to another, trading goods, building colonies, and sharing knowledge. They were polite, calm, and always ready to help. If someone met a human in those days, they saw a friendly face and a gentle smile, not a warrior's glare. Children of other species were told bedtime stories about the old humans, beings who once commanded fire and steel, but even those tales sounded like myths. No one really believed that a race of such power ever existed. The humans themselves didn't talk much about the past. Maybe they were ashamed of what they had done long ago, or maybe they just wanted peace after centuries of bloodshed. Whatever the reason, they chose silence. Their great fleets were hidden away in forgotten sectors. Their weapons were buried beneath the ground, locked under ancient codes. The few who still remembered, the old veterans and the scholars, guarded those secrets carefully. They knew the truth: humanity wasn't weak or gone, it was only resting. Across the stars, hundreds of quiet human colonies thrived. They were built on planets with calm oceans, green valleys, and bright skies. People farmed, studied, built new technologies, and raised families. On the surface, life looked ordinary, even fragile. But beneath the peace, old things slept. Machines from another age, relics from wars that no one dared to mention. In some remote corners of these worlds, you could still find ancient bunkers sealed with warning signs no one could read anymore. Inside those bunkers, dormant cores pulsed slowly, as if waiting for something. A few older people still spoke in whispers about the silent era, when humanity had fought not for power, but for survival. They remembered how the skies once turned red with plasma fire, how worlds vanished in seconds, and how humans had sworn never to let that happen again. After that war, the surviving leaders had made a decision: to hide their strength, to disappear from galactic politics, and to live quietly. It wasn't weakness. It was wisdom born from pain. The galaxy moved on. New species appeared. The humans were no longer seen as dangerous or powerful, only as another peaceful race among many. Some of the younger civilizations even joked about them, calling humans the sleeping ones or the soft traders. No one knew that under those smiles and peaceful eyes lay memories that could still bring entire empires to their knees. There was an old saying among the few who studied ancient human history: if you see a human smile in peace, remember that once they smiled in war. But no one paid attention to sayings anymore. The truth had faded into dust and myth. On a small colony at the edge of known space, life moved slowly. The people there were simple: farmers, engineers, teachers. They worked under twin suns and slept under skies filled with unfamiliar stars. Children ran across fields, chasing tiny drones that hummed softly. Old men sat outside in the evenings watching the horizon, thinking about how quiet the universe had become. It had been so long since anyone had heard of war that peace felt eternal. Yet, deep inside that same planet, something ancient slept. Buried far below the surface, beneath layers of stone and steel, was a chamber filled with old machines. They had been placed there generations ago and sealed forever, or so people thought. The machines were silent now, their lights dark, their metal bodies covered in dust. But if someone listened closely enough, there was a faint hum, a heartbeat that never completely stopped. In another corner of the galaxy, scholars in alien academies debated over old ruins found on forgotten worlds. Some ruins bore strange symbols, marks of human origin. One young historian once said in a lecture, "Humans may appear ordinary today, but the evidence shows they once built weapons capable of bending space itself." The audience laughed, thinking it was impossible. After all, the humans they knew now traded fruit, not fire. But the truth was never lost, only hidden. The ancient human archives, locked behind old quantum gates, still existed. Only a handful of protectors had the access codes. They were not soldiers anymore, but they carried the weight of history in their silence. Each generation, they passed the codes down to the next, never explaining too much, only saying, "Keep them safe." You'll know when they're needed. For the longest time, no one ever needed them. Humanity's greatest secret slept peacefully. No wars, no threats. No reason to wake the giants. However, peace had a strange way of making others forget respect. Among the newer species in the galaxy was one called the Threxus Dominion, a rising power that valued conquest over understanding. They expanded fast, swallowing smaller civilizations and taking resources without asking. When their scouts first encountered human traders, they saw only simple ships and gentle voices. They thought the humans were weak, outdated, unarmed. To them, a peaceful race was an easy target, but that moment hadn't come yet. In this first chapter of the story, humans were still calm, still quiet, still keeping to themselves. They traded, explored, and helped build the galaxy's infrastructure. They sent engineers to distant planets to repair old jump gates. They helped heal others after plagues and disasters. Everyone liked them and everyone trusted them. No one could see the quiet tension beneath that friendly surface. In every human, somewhere deep inside, there was a shadow of what they once were. They didn't talk about it, but they felt it. The memory of battle, the sound of explosions in the vacuum, the weight of survival. It was in their DNA, passed down like an old song. Even children, though they never saw war, sometimes had strange dreams of fire and falling stars. If someone could have seen through time, they would have noticed that human colonies were not as defenseless as they appeared. Every settlement had hidden systems under its surface. Automated defenses disguised as simple structures, satellites that monitored space far beyond civilian range, and networks that could come alive in an instant if danger appeared. Humanity had learned to build peace without forgetting how to protect it. There were also the Watchers, humans who worked quietly behind governments and companies, watching for any sign that the galaxy was shifting again. They didn't command armies or wear uniforms, but their eyes were sharp. They noticed patterns others ignored. Strange transmissions, odd movements of fleets, changes in trade routes. They knew the signs of rising conflict because they had inherited the instincts of a species forged in endless war. Still, to the rest of the galaxy, humans were harmless. They smiled. They traded. They built. They looked like the least dangerous beings in existence. And perhaps that was the cleverest disguise of all. Many believed peace would last forever. Even the oldest humans had begun to think maybe, finally, the galaxy had grown past its hunger for war. The young ones laughed at the stories of the war gods, thinking they were only ancient myths meant to scare children. They didn't know that the myths were warnings. On one quiet night under the twin moons of that faraway colony, an old man stood by the edge of a lake, looking at the reflection of the stars. His grandchildren asked him what he was thinking. He smiled softly and said, "We've been sleeping for a long time. I just hope no one ever tries to wake us." They didn't understand what he meant. But somewhere deep in the planet, far below the calm lakes and bright cities, an ancient system registered the faintest of signals, a pulse of energy from deep space. It was nothing serious yet, just a flicker, but it made one of the long dormant machines open a single eye of blue light, then close it again. Peace continued. The suns rose, people worked, and laughter filled the air. Life was simple and good. But the galaxy was vast, and not everyone understood what it meant to live beside sleeping gods. The humans had chosen to rest, not to forget. And though they no longer built weapons, they still carried the knowledge of how to do it, how to create, how to destroy, and how to survive. For now, they remained still, dreaming quietly among the stars. But somewhere beyond human space, forces were moving, forces that didn't believe in legends, that didn't fear old stories. And soon, without even realizing it, someone would make a mistake that would echo through the galaxy. Someone would kick the temple door. And when that happened, the sleeping gods of war would wake again. For generations, peace had covered human space like a soft blanket. It was a kind of silence people had grown to trust. Trade routes were open, cities shined with light, and the young had never even heard the word invasion. To them, war was an ancient story, something that happened long before they were born, like dragons or ghosts. But far away from those calm worlds, something was changing. On the outer edges of the galaxy, a new power was growing fast, the Threxus Dominion. They were ambitious, proud, and hungry for expansion. To them, The universe was full of unclaimed resources waiting to be taken. Their leaders believed that peace was just another word for weakness, and those who lived quietly were nothing but prey. Their fleets spread like wildfire, conquering one small civilization after another. They had strong ships and fearless soldiers, but even more dangerous than their weapons was their arrogance. They thought they were unstoppable. And soon that arrogance turned their eyes toward a small human colony near the border, a place so quiet that even the main human government rarely contacted it. It was a simple world. The people there lived ordinary lives, growing crops, studying stars, and repairing old satellites. They didn't have large armies or powerful fleets. Why would they? The galaxy had been peaceful for hundreds of years. The few defense ships they had were old, more useful for transport than battle. To outsiders, it looked like an easy target. When the Threxus scouts first saw the planet, they didn't recognize it as part of human space. Its transmissions were soft and routine, its defense grid inactive. They thought it was a forgotten settlement, maybe a mining outpost. To them, it was just another world to claim. So without warning they came. The attack didn't start with explosions or fire. It began with silence. Communication signals from the planet suddenly stopped. Cargo ships in nearby routes lost contact. A few small vessels that went to check never returned. Then a distress call appeared for only a few seconds before vanishing again. It said just one word: help. Back in central human space, no one understood what was happening. The signal was weak and distorted. By the time it reached the monitoring stations, it was already hours old. Some thought it was a technical error. Others thought it was a false alarm. After all, no one attacked humans anymore. That idea seemed impossible. But on that lonely planet, the truth was very different. The Threxus forces had landed with little resistance. They didn't come to negotiate or communicate, they came to take. They forced the colonists to work for them, to dig out minerals and dismantle old ruins that lay beneath the surface. The humans tried to reason with them, explaining that those ruins were sacred relics from an older time, not to be touched. But the invaders didn't listen. They saw only metal and stone, not history or warning. One of the ruins they destroyed was an ancient underground vault. It had been built long ago, sealed with human symbols no one alive could read anymore. The moment they broke through the outer wall, something strange happened. A pulse of energy spread through the planet's magnetic field. It was invisible, but powerful. Every old system buried in the ground, machines that had been asleep for centuries, registered it. No one on the planet noticed right away. But far away across human space, old satellites woke from dormancy. Ancient beacons lit up one by one. Some transmitted data. Others sent nothing but coordinates. It was like a heartbeat rippling through the stars, slow but unstoppable. For a while, the human government stayed quiet. They analyzed the data, thinking it might just be a system malfunction. But soon, reports began to flood in from distant sectors. Something was happening. Old communication relays, sealed for generations, were activating on their own. Outposts that had been forgotten for ages were suddenly online again. And deep in the archives, the oldest AI systems, designed to detect threats, were waking up. It was as if the galaxy itself was whispering. They kicked the door. When the first clear images from the attacked colony arrived, the truth hit like a shockwave. The planet was half destroyed. The invaders had taken thousands of people as captives. More importantly, the site of the ancient vault was gone, blown open and stripped clean. The human council sat in silence for hours, unable to believe what they were seeing. Most of them had never known real war. They spoke in calm voices, trying to stay logical. "We must negotiate," one said. "We can't start another conflict." Another added, "Maybe it's a misunderstanding. We can't assume hostility." But somewhere in that meeting, an older man who had lived through the tail end of the silent wars stood up. His face was calm, but his voice carried the weight of something ancient. He said quietly, "You don't understand. This isn't a misunderstanding. They have woken something." No one spoke after that. Meanwhile, in the outer colonies, people began to feel it too. A change in the air. a strange awareness. The old veterans, the ones who still remembered the wars that others had forgotten, started preparing quietly. They dusted off old uniforms, checked ancient tools, and called in favors from forgotten contacts. They didn't wait for permission. They just knew. In hidden places, deep within abandoned asteroids and icy moons, the sleeping war machines began to stir. Their engines hummed softly, systems checking themselves for the first time in centuries. Old human AIs connected to each other, sharing encrypted messages through networks no one else could detect. They spoke in short, coded phrases. Signal confirmed. Authorization pending. Standby for recall. On one colony, a young engineer who had never seen war noticed strange readings on her console. She thought it was a malfunction, until her monitor flickered and displayed a message written in an ancient language. She didn't understand the words, but she could feel their weight. It was a call, not of anger but of awakening. Across human space, stories began to spread. Cargo pilots whispered that they had seen massive shapes moving through the dark, ships larger than any they had ever known. Farmers on quiet planets reported strange vibrations in the ground, like distant thunder. No one believed them at first, but soon it became impossible to ignore. The humans were waking up. Still, to the rest of the galaxy, it looked like nothing was happening. The Threxus Dominion continued their expansion, proud and unbothered. They mocked the humans for sending peaceful envoys instead of fleets. They thought they had already won. But deep inside, humanity had changed. They weren't angry, not yet. What they felt was older and heavier than anger. It was the stirring of something they had buried for too long, the instinct to protect, to fight back when the line was crossed. They didn't rush to war. They simply began to remember who they were. In the coming days, human intelligence networks reactivated. Signals that hadn't been used in centuries came alive again. From forgotten spaceports, small ships began to vanish quietly into the void, carrying messages and equipment. On isolated moons, human engineers started restoring ancient reactors. When asked what they were doing, they only said, "Preparing." And yet ordinary people still went to work, still laughed, still believed peace would return. Most didn't know what was happening behind the scenes, but the ones who did knew that the age of silence was ending. The Threxus didn't realize it, but their attack had done something far greater than any of them could have imagined. They hadn't just conquered a planet. They had touched something sacred, something older than their entire empire. They had kicked open a door that should have stayed closed. The energy pulse from the destroyed vault continued to move outward through space, invisible but constant. Somewhere beyond the edge of known systems, an ancient fleet received it. Massive ships, covered in dust and shadow, began to light up one by one. Their control AIs, once loyal to commanders long dead, searched for new signals of leadership. And they found them, not from soldiers, but from humanity itself. In that quiet moment, across billions of stars, the sleeping gods of war began to breathe again. They weren't returning to conquer. They were returning because someone had broken the peace. Humanity had tried to forget its past, but the past had not forgotten them, and soon, the galaxy would remember too. Across the quiet human colonies, something had changed. No one could say exactly what it was, but everyone could feel it. It was in the way people spoke, the way they looked at the night sky, and the way the air seemed heavier with every passing day. At first, there was only confusion. The central communication lines buzzed with whispers, signals flickering across long-forgotten frequencies, mysterious messages written in old human code. Engineers found their systems acting strange, lights blinking for no reason, ancient files appearing out of nowhere. When they tried to delete them, the files simply reappeared, with one line written at the end of each message. Stand by for awakening. No one understood what that meant. Some thought it was a glitch, a leftover from old programs. But those who still remembered the ancient wars, they knew better. They recognized the tone, the pattern, the rhythm of those codes. It was a call, and that call was only meant for humans. In the deep corners of human space, on forgotten stations and hollow moons, The old ones began to stir. They were not rulers or generals anymore, just ordinary people who had lived quietly for too long. But each one carried memories that the young had never known. They remembered what humanity once was when it had to stand against the impossible. One of those elders sat in his small home at the edge of a mining colony, staring at a flickering hologram that had suddenly come alive after being dead for decades. The symbol on it was unmistakable, the mark of the old guard. It was a sign no one had seen in hundreds of years. He didn't smile. He didn't panic. He simply whispered, "So, it's time." He stood up slowly, his joints stiff with age, and opened a sealed box that had been hidden beneath the floor. Inside was an old communicator, one that could connect to the secure channels of the ancient human command network. With shaky fingers, he activated it. A familiar tone filled the room, followed by a robotic voice saying, "Authorization accepted. Reactivation in progress." He closed his eyes. He had hoped never to hear that sound again. Across the galaxy, similar scenes unfolded. In quiet homes, dusty bunkers, and abandoned outposts, men and women who had once sworn never to fight again began to move. They didn't contact the government or the council. They didn't make speeches or ask for permission. They simply started preparing. In old scrapyards, forgotten ships were being repaired by hands that hadn't touched controls in years. Deep in asteroid fields, massive hangars long thought empty began to hum with power. Entire systems that had gone dark centuries ago were coming alive again, their lights spreading like stars being reborn. The younger generation had no idea what was happening. They saw the lights in the sky and called them beautiful. They didn't realize that those lights were the engines of ships older than their great-grandparents, ships that once carried the fury of all humankind. But even as humanity awakened, it wasn't out of hatred. It wasn't for revenge. It was because they knew what came next. They knew how fragile peace was, and they understood that once the balance of fear was broken, chaos always followed. In the halls of the Human Council, debates grew heated. Many leaders still wanted to stay calm to avoid war, but communication with the captured colony had been lost completely, and the images they received from nearby scanners showed the truth. The Threxus Dominion was not stopping. They were building bases, mining human soil, and treating the planet as if it already belonged to them. Finally, after long silence, the same elder who had warned them before spoke again. His voice was steady but filled with weight. "We gave peace every chance we could," he said. "Now they've reminded the universe who we are." Outside, across the stars, human space began to shift. Merchant ships quietly disappeared from trade routes. Research stations that used to broadcast scientific data went silent. Civilian traffic stopped traveling near the outer borders. To other species, it looked like humanity was retreating. But those who had lived long enough knew that this was not retreat. It was preparation. In deep space, the first of the old fleets was coming back online. They were called the Silent Wings, a group of ships that had been hidden in a nebula for centuries. Each ship was enormous, built with technologies most humans no longer remembered how to make. Their hulls were dark, their engines silent, their weapons cold, but all of that changed once the awakening signal reached them. One by one, their systems hummed to life, glowing faintly in the mist of the nebula. The AIs inside these ships, programs so old they were almost legends, spoke to one another across the void. Their voices were calm and deep, speaking in languages forgotten by the New World. Threat detected. Human colonies compromised. Directive restored. Protect humankind. And then for the first time in centuries, the Silent Wings began to move. Far away in the civilian colonies, the changes were subtle but noticeable. Families received encrypted messages telling them to stay indoors at certain hours. Entire cities quietly stocked supplies without explaining why. The news stations said nothing, but people could feel that something big was happening. Even the air felt different, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. The few who still remembered the old days began to teach again. They gathered small groups of young people and spoke about courage, unity, and the strength of being human. They didn't talk about violence, they talked about standing together, about remembering who they were. And for the first time, the younger ones listened with real attention. The stories didn't sound like myths anymore. One evening, in a small valley colony, a group of young technicians stood on a hill watching the sky. They saw streaks of light moving silently between the stars. The eldest among them whispered, "Those are ours." The younger ones stared, not understanding what ours really meant. But they felt something deep inside, something powerful and proud. The Threxus Dominion still didn't notice. To them, humans were small, unimportant, quiet. Their scouts flew near human space, laughing at how empty it looked. They saw no fleets, no armies, no resistance. They didn't realize that what they were seeing was a mask, that behind that quiet emptiness, thousands of systems were preparing for something far beyond their imagination. Humanity didn't speak of revenge. They didn't plan to destroy. They only wanted their people back, their peace restored, and their sacred places untouched. But if anyone thought they would beg or surrender, they were about to learn the truth. Humans had always been patient, but patience was not weakness. It was control. The awakening spread slowly, not like a loud storm, but like a rising tide. Every day another system came online, another ancient ship reactivated, another piece of lost technology found its way home. Engineers who had never worked on military machines suddenly received old blueprints sent from nowhere. The files were labeled simply, "For Defense Protocol." In the deep space between stars, massive structures began to appear, automated stations that had been dormant since the ancient wars. No one had built them recently. They had been waiting all this time, hidden inside asteroids, disguised as debris. Now their metal arms extended, their lights glowing faintly like eyes opening after a long sleep. Humanity was not shouting, not boasting. They were simply waking up. And with every heartbeat of this awakening, the galaxy grew more uneasy. The younger civilizations felt something strange in the air, an energy that couldn't be explained. Old stories started to resurface. Stories about the time when humans fought not to win but to survive, and how nothing in the galaxy could stand against them when they truly awakened. Back on the central human world, a quiet broadcast went out across all colonies. It wasn't from the council or any government. It came from the oldest communication array on the planet, one that hadn't been used in centuries. The message was short, made of only 3 words. "We are awake." The words echoed through space, bouncing off satellites, passing through static and storms, reaching even the darkest corners of the galaxy. Those who understood what it meant felt their hearts sink. Those who didn't soon would, and as the message faded, the stars around human space began to glow brighter. Tiny points of light that were not stars at all, but engines coming online, preparing for movement. The galaxy had forgotten the truth of humankind. They had mistaken peace for weakness, silence for fear, patience for surrender. But the truth was different. Humans had simply chosen to sleep because they were tired of destruction. They had hidden their power not out of fear, but out of wisdom. Now that wisdom had decided it was time to stand again. The old veterans stood side by side with the young, ready to face what was coming. They didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain. Humanity was no longer asleep. And somewhere beyond the stars, in the heart of the awakening fleets, a deep voice from an ancient AI spoke the final line of activation protocol. War gods reconnected, awaiting orders. The universe shivered in silence. Humanity had opened its eyes again, and nothing would ever be the same. When the message "We are awake" echoed through space, most of the galaxy didn't understand it. To them it was just a signal, another transmission lost among thousands. But to those who remembered the old days, it was like hearing thunder after centuries of silence. At first, nothing seemed to change. The stars still shined, trade routes stayed open, and the Threxus Dominion continued its expansion as if nothing had happened. They laughed at the message, calling it an empty threat from a race too old and too gentle to fight. They thought humans were just trying to sound brave. But in the quiet corners of the galaxy, strange things began to happen. Ships that had been lost for hundreds of years suddenly appeared on scanners, moving through deep space with silent precision. Entire sectors, once filled with traffic, became off-limits overnight. Navigation systems from other species stopped working near human borders, showing only static where maps used to be, and when explorers tried to enter those zones, they never came back. The galaxy began to whisper. Rumors spread faster than light. Traders spoke of seeing enormous ships drifting through space without sound, their lights dim and their hulls scarred from old battles. Some said they moved like ghosts, appearing and disappearing between the stars. Others claimed they saw whole fleets in perfect formation, just watching from the edge of the void. No one knew if it was real or imagination, but everyone could feel something had changed. The Threxus Dominion ignored the warnings. They were proud, powerful, and convinced no one could stop them. Their leaders told their people that the humans were weak. Farmers pretending to be warriors, storytellers pretending to be soldiers. They sent more ships to occupy human colonies, building more bases, forcing their control deeper. But then, strange reports started coming in. Outposts near human space had gone dark. Entire fleets stopped responding. No distress signals, no explosions, just silence. The Threxus command thought it was a communication glitch and sent more ships to investigate. None returned. In their arrogance, they couldn't see it, but the galaxy could. Everyone knew what was happening. The sleeping giants had opened their eyes. On the outer rim worlds, where human settlers lived close to alien trade routes, people began noticing things too. Their skies filled with faint lights, lines that stretched and faded like trails of falling stars. The old ones knew what they were, movement patterns of fleets traveling at light speed. But these fleets weren't loud, they weren't destructive. They moved quietly, efficiently, with purpose. On the human homeworlds, life continued as normal. The news still spoke of peace, the market stayed open, and the people went to work. But in the background, the world itself seemed to hum. Factories that had been closed for generations started working again. Ancient research centers reopened, their sealed doors unlocking automatically. It wasn't chaos, it was coordination. Everything was awakening in perfect rhythm, as if guided by an invisible hand. The old veterans, the ones who had seen the ancient wars, began to teach again. Not about weapons, but about control, about never losing humanity even when surrounded by conflict. They reminded the young that true strength wasn't about destruction. It was about restraint. Humanity had learned that lesson long ago, and that's why they had chosen peace. But now they had to protect that peace again. The galaxy's major powers started to worry. They sent diplomats to talk with the Human Council, trying to understand what was happening. But the Council gave no answers. Every message they sent was calm, polite, and brief. Do not interfere. This matter is between us and those who broke the peace. That single sentence made the entire galaxy shiver, because everyone knew, when humans spoke like that, they meant every word. As weeks passed, fear began to grow. The Threxus Dominion tried to hide their losses, but the truth couldn't stay buried. Refugees from the border planets arrived with stories that spread like fire. They said the sky had turned white with light and then everything went quiet. When they came out from hiding, the Threxus armies were gone. No wreckage, no remains, just empty fields and quiet cities. At first, no one believed them. But more survivors came, all saying the same thing. The humans didn't destroy, they erased. Not in anger, not in cruelty, but with precision. It was like watching an ancient storm sweep through and then vanish without a trace. In distant star systems, alien governments began recalling their ships from human borders. Trade routes were rerouted, treaties were quietly rewritten. Everyone knew better than to stand in the way of what was coming. The galaxy remembered the old stories, how in the past, humanity had fought wars that spanned hundreds of worlds, not because they wanted power, but because someone had forced their hand. On one observation station far from human space, an alien scientist recorded a strange phenomenon. The night sky, which had always been full of stars, now had dark patches, shadows moving like shapes between the constellations. When she adjusted her scanner, she realized those shadows weren't natural. They were ships, thousands of them, moving silently, covering each other in formation. The Threxus Dominion finally began to panic. Their pride cracked under the weight of reality. They sent messages to the Human Council, demanding negotiation, but the humans didn't reply. They didn't need to. Their silence was answer enough. Deep inside the human network, the ancient AI command cores worked in perfect coordination. Their instructions were simple: restore balance, protect humanity, preserve life where possible. These weren't machines of rage, they were guardians. They didn't see the galaxy as enemies, only as potential threats to peace. Their purpose was not war, it was correction. And soon, the corrections began. One after another, Threxus-controlled outposts simply vanished from galactic maps. No explosions, no broadcasts, just empty coordinates. When scouts from other species went to check, they found only silence and sometimes faint traces of human signals left behind as if to say, "We were here." The galaxy grew quiet again, but this time it was a heavy, uneasy quiet. No one wanted to be next. For the first time in living memory, every government, every race, every commander understood something that had been forgotten for ages. Humans didn't need to shout to be dangerous. They didn't need to conquer to win. Their strength was in their silence. Back on human worlds, people didn't celebrate. There were no parades, no cheering crowds. Everyone knew this wasn't victory, it was defense. They mourned the lives lost on the captured colony. They rebuilt what had been broken, and they waited for the day they could go back to peace. Even the children, who didn't fully understand what was happening, felt the difference. They noticed that their parents looked at the sky more often, standing quietly as if listening to something far away. Some children asked, "Are we at war?" But the adults always gave the same soft answer. "No, we're just awake." The Threx's dominion was collapsing from within. Fear and confusion spread among their ranks. Commanders abandoned posts, soldiers refused to fight, and entire fleets fled toward the outer rim. It wasn't human weapons that broke them. It was the realization of what they had unleashed. One of the last transmissions ever intercepted from a Threx's ship was simple and chilling. It said, "They are not what we thought. They are not sleeping anymore." That was the last anyone ever heard from the Threx's main fleet. In the weeks that followed, the galaxy changed. The borders of human space expanded quietly, not through conquest but through respect. Neighboring species, once cautious or dismissive, now treated humanity with reverence. No one dared to provoke them again, and yet through all of it, the humans stayed humble. They didn't take new planets. They didn't demand tribute. They simply restored peace and pulled back. It wasn't victory that defined them, it was mercy. Because even when they could have destroyed everything, they didn't. They remembered what it meant to be human. Soon, the skies went still again. The fleets that had moved like shadows began to fade from scanners. The strange signal stopped. The galaxy slowly returned to its normal rhythm. But everyone knew something had changed forever. The humans had reminded the stars who they were. In the end, no one spoke about it publicly. The records of the conflict were erased, covered under quiet agreements. Life went on, but in every government, in every academy, in every child's storybook, there was one unspoken truth that everyone carried from that day forward. Never disturb the peace of humanity, because when humans wake, the gods of war walk again. When humanity finally moved, it wasn't out of rage. They didn't march blindly across the stars or fire their weapons without thought. Every action was measured, precise, and intentional. They had awakened because someone had broken their peace, and they were determined to restore balance, not to conquer. The Threx's dominion had underestimated the humans, thinking them quiet, simple, and weak. They believed a few colonies and some scattered fleets could never pose a threat to their empire. That assumption had been their first mistake. Their second mistake was believing that humans would respond like everyone else, with anger or chaos. Humans were different. They did not rush into battle for glory or vengeance. They acted like guardians, and that was far more terrifying. The first step was always recovery. The Human Council, working with the old veterans who had risen again, organized teams to rescue the captured colonists. They did not send massive fleets to bombard planets. Instead, they used intelligence, coordination, and stealth to locate the people held in Threx's outposts. Small, fast ships moved silently through space, avoiding patrols, using old human codes that no other species could understand. The rescued colonists often described it as a miracle. One moment they were trapped, hopeless, and afraid. The next, humans they didn't recognize appeared to lead them out of danger. No grand speeches, no displays of power, just calm, patient guidance. Families reunited quietly without fanfare, but with relief so deep it left people speechless. While the rescue operations continued, the Threx's dominion was already beginning to crumble. Entire planets under their control began rebelling. Soldiers who had followed orders out of fear suddenly refused to fight. Administrators abandoned posts. Even some of their leaders began to disappear, realizing they could not face what humanity had awakened. Humans didn't chase them recklessly. They didn't destroy the Threx's worlds indiscriminately. Instead, they used precision to restore order. Communication networks were reestablished, vital resources were protected, and people who had been forced into labor were freed. On every planet, Humans left messages of explanation, telling the inhabitants they were free and that the Threxus would no longer control them. It was a form of justice unlike anything the galaxy had seen before. Humans were not cruel. They did not punish the innocent. They targeted only those responsible for breaking their peace, and when they did confront those responsible, it was done with authority that left no room for debate. The Threxus commanders who had dared to invade human space were captured or neutralized with minimal risk to anyone else. Every move was efficient, every action deliberate. Even in the face of power, humanity showed mercy. They did not destroy cities or populations. Entire fleets were disabled, not annihilated. Systems were secured but left intact, so life could continue without unnecessary suffering. It was not weakness, it was restraint. They understood the difference between strength and cruelty. In one notable operation, a Threxus fortress that had held thousands of humans was approached by a human fleet. From a distance, it looked as if the humans were preparing for an assault, but instead of firing, they used communication codes and automated systems to disable the fortress defenses quietly. By the time the Threxus soldiers realized what was happening, their weapons were offline and the doors opened on their own. Humans walked in, took control, and led the captives out safely. There was no chaos, no violence, just precision, calm, and restoration. Across multiple systems, the same pattern repeated. Every Threxus-controlled planet was either liberated or neutralized with minimal damage. It was strategic, efficient, and purposeful. Humans were reclaiming what was theirs, but they were not conquering beyond what was necessary. They were protecting their people, restoring peace, and reminding the galaxy why humans had once been feared. The galaxy began to notice. Alien civilizations that had long regarded humans as harmless now whispered stories about their efficiency, their control, and their mercy. They spoke of fleets moving silently through space, systems being restored without a single life lost, and the old humans who had once fought wars that reshaped galaxies. There was awe, fear, and respect, sometimes all at once, yet humanity remained humble. They did not boast about their actions. No celebrations were held. No records were widely broadcast. Even the rescued colonists were encouraged to keep quiet about what they had seen. Humanity did not want fame or praise. Their actions were about duty and responsibility, not glory. This restraint made them even more formidable. To the galaxy, it seemed almost supernatural. Humans had the power to destroy if they wished, but they chose not to. That choice, that control, was what reminded the universe of their true strength. Throughout the liberation campaigns, communication remained key. Humans sent messages to the freed populations, assuring them that no harm would come if they cooperated with the restoration efforts. They explained that the Threxus had forced their actions, but now order was returning. People were encouraged to rebuild, to resume normal lives, and to trust that the humans would maintain balance until the galaxy understood peace once again. This careful approach extended to technology and systems as well. Human engineers and veterans repaired the infrastructure that had been damaged, not just for the benefit of their own people, but for the inhabitants of the liberated planets. Power grids, water systems, communication networks, everything was restored with the same care and precision. Every effort was made to leave life intact, to respect civilization, even while showing the full measure of human power. In the midst of all this, the Threxus Dominion's leaders were forced to confront the consequences of their arrogance. They had believed humans were weak. They had thought a few fleets and captured colonies could intimidate a peaceful species. Now their mistakes were evident. Entire military networks were disabled. Strategic outposts fell without a fight. Their empire, built on fear and expansion, was collapsing not through destruction, but through human efficiency and discipline. Even their allies, who had once supported their campaigns, began withdrawing. The galaxy saw which side offered true security and fairness. Where the Threxus ruled through fear, humans restored through guidance. Where one side demanded obedience, the other built trust. And yet humanity never lost sight of their purpose. This was not revenge. It was restoration. Every action, every decision, every operation reflected that. They reminded the galaxy why humans had once been legends, not because they destroyed everything, but because when pushed to the edge they could awaken, protect, and restore balance in ways no one else could. For the colonists who had been rescued, the experience was unforgettable. They spoke quietly of the humans who had appeared from the shadows, guided them through the dark, and restored their lives without harm. They remembered the calm voices, the precise movements, the care shown even to those who had once been enemies. It was awe-inspiring. Among the younger humans, there was also a lesson. They learned that power was not about strength alone. True power was about restraint, control, and the responsibility to protect what mattered most. They saw their elders act with wisdom, not fury, and understood that the human legacy was not built on conquest, but on the ability to rise when necessary, with care and justice. As the Threxus Dominion collapsed, the galaxy watched silently. Humans could have conquered and taken everything for themselves. They could have punished those who opposed them with full force. But they did not. They restored order, freed the oppressed, and returned to the edges of their territory without taking more than what was theirs. The message became clear. Humans were no longer sleeping. They were awake, aware, and ready. And yet, even with that awakening, they chose peace wherever it was possible. Their actions were a reminder to the galaxy that true strength was not measured by destruction, but by control, precision, and mercy. When the campaigns ended, the human fleets returned to hidden sectors, their presence barely detectable. The liberated colonies were given tools, resources, and guidance to maintain themselves. Humans disappeared quietly, leaving no fear behind, only respect. The galaxy remembered, however, and the story spread through whispers, tales, and cautious reports. Humans had acted like gods of war, but unlike most deities, they had chosen mercy over wrath. And in the quiet of space beyond the edges of known civilization, the humans returned to their homes. They repaired what had been broken in their own worlds, and the young returned to learning, building, and living. Yet deep inside, every human knew that the galaxy had remembered their true nature. They had shown restraint, justice, and power all at once. The legend of humanity was no longer a myth. It was reality. The galaxy had seen them awake, and no one would ever doubt again that humans were more than ordinary beings. They were guardians. They were protectors. They were a force that could rise at any time, not to conquer but to ensure balance. And humanity, for now, returned to quiet. Their fleets faded from scanners, their signals disappeared from communication networks, and life on the surface of their worlds went on as usual. The universe, however, had changed forever. Everyone knew one simple truth. If humans chose to rise again, it would be precise, controlled, and unstoppable. The galaxy would never forget. After weeks of careful operations, humanity's awakening had reached its peak. The Threxus Dominion no longer posed a threat. Their fleets were disabled, their colonies freed, and their leaders captured or gone. The galaxy had seen what humans could do when pushed beyond patience and peace, and the memory of that power spread like a quiet storm. But even in victory, the humans did not celebrate. There were no parades, no speeches, no displays of triumph. Humanity had always understood that power without purpose was empty. They had acted not for glory or conquest, but to protect, to restore, and to teach the galaxy a lesson it had almost forgotten. Across the liberated colonies, life began to return to normal. Families rebuilt their homes, children returned to schools, and markets reopened. The humans who had led the rescue operations moved quietly among the people, offering help where needed, but never lingering in the spotlight. They spoke softly, guided gently, and left before their presence could draw unnecessary attention. The young humans who had witnessed these events learned lessons that could not be taught in classrooms. They saw that true strength was not measured by the size of one's fleet, the power of one's weapons, or the ability to destroy. Strength was measured by patience, wisdom, and the ability to act decisively when necessary, while sparing what could be spared. Even the old veterans, who had seen countless wars in their time, were struck by the calmness of the actions taken. "We could have crushed them completely," one said quietly, speaking to a group of young engineers. "But power is not cruelty. Control is the real strength. Mercy is the real courage." As the galaxy adjusted to this new reality, humans began to retreat. They withdrew their fleets from active patrols, closed the temporary bases they had established, and returned to their own systems. The Silent Wings, massive ships that had been dormant for centuries and had now risen to serve humanity once more, slipped back into hidden sectors. Their lights dimmed, their engines quieted, and they became shadows once again among the stars. The Threxus Dominion's remnants watched in fear and awe. They had expected an angry enemy, a chaotic assault, perhaps a war of annihilation. Instead, they saw humans act with control, precision, and mercy. The lessons were clear. Humanity would not strike without reason, but if provoked again, their response would be decisive and absolute. In this period of quiet, the Human Council worked behind the scenes. They re-established communication networks, restored trade routes, and ensured that all liberated colonies could defend themselves if necessary. It was a time of rebuilding, not conquest. Every decision reflected the same principle: maintain balance, protect life, and ensure that the galaxy remembered the consequences of disturbing human peace. Even as they withdrew, humans left subtle signs of their presence. Automated stations were installed in key sectors to monitor for potential threats. These stations were not weapons, they were guardians. They could detect danger, coordinate rescue operations, and alert humans if a crisis arose, but they would not act independently. Humanity had chosen to trust the galaxy to continue in peace, but with safeguards in place. The younger humans, who had seen fleets move silently across space and systems come alive with efficiency, began to take their place in the ranks of guardians. They trained under the guidance of the old veterans, learning not just technical skills, but the philosophy that had guided their people for centuries. Power is responsibility, restraint is courage, and peace is a treasure worth protecting at all costs. Stories of the awakening began to spread quietly across human space, not through news broadcasts or propaganda, but through personal accounts, whispers, and legends passed from one generation to the next. Children grew up hearing about how humans had risen like gods of war, yet acted with wisdom and mercy. These stories inspired a sense of pride, responsibility, and respect for life, shaping the culture of future generations. Beyond human space, the galaxy also remembered. Alien species that had once ignored humans now treated them with caution, respect, and sometimes fear. Traders, diplomats, and explorers understood that humans were not aggressive conquerors, but they were protectors who could respond with precision and power if necessary. The lesson was clear: never disturb the peace of humanity, for they would awaken when forced to, and their response would be measured, unstoppable, and just. Even in the absence of active conflict, humanity remained vigilant. Systems were monitored, fleets kept ready in hidden sectors, and veterans quietly trained the next generation. There was no rush, no visible display of force, only preparation and awareness. Humans had learned that true safety came from readiness, not from dominance. The colonies that had been freed began to thrive again, supported by the knowledge and guidance humans had provided. New settlements were established, trade resumed, and communities rebuilt with care. People began to speak of the humans not as warriors, but as guardians, protectors who had risen in the shadows to restore balance and leave only order behind. In the quiet of space, the silent wings returned to their resting places. The massive ships that had once inspired fear became legends once more. Hidden among asteroids, nebulae, and remote sectors, their presence was known only to a few, yet their readiness remained, a promise that humanity could awaken again if needed. The Human Council recorded everything in secrecy. Every mission, every operation, every act of mercy was logged, not for fame, but for history. They knew the galaxy would change again someday. They wanted future generations to understand the lessons of restraint, precision, and justice. That knowledge would guide them, ensuring that the legacy of humanity was one of balance, wisdom, and strength tempered by compassion. In the centuries that followed, the galaxy often wondered if humans had truly withdrawn. Explorers reported quiet systems, hidden fleets, and ancient stations that seemed to monitor, but never act. Scholars debated the nature of humanity's power, speculating on what it might mean if humans chose to rise again, yet none could deny the truth. Humans had shown the universe that they were not mere survivors, they were guardians, capable of immense power, yet wise enough to use it with restraint. And so, humanity returned to its quiet life. Children laughed, families worked, and the ordinary rhythms of existence resumed. But underneath the calm, the galaxy was different. Every civilization that had observed the events understood that humans were not to be underestimated. They were peaceful, yes, but peace had limits. And when those limits were crossed, humanity would awaken once more, unstoppable and just. In time, the legend of the awakened humans became part of the culture itself. It was told not just as history, but as a lesson. Patience, wisdom, and restraint could achieve more than anger, chaos, or blind destruction. Humanity had reminded the galaxy that strength was not measured in firepower alone, but in the courage to act when necessary and the mercy to hold back when possible. For humans themselves, life returned to quietude. Farmers tended fields, engineers repaired old ships, and children learned under the guidance of veterans who had once awakened the fleets. Yet all knew deep in their hearts that the gods of war slept again, not gone, not weak, but waiting. Waiting in silence, ready to rise if peace was threatened, carrying the lessons of mercy, justice, and balance across the stars. And in the end, humanity had done what few could. They had awakened, delivered justice, and then returned to quiet strength. The galaxy had learned its lesson, and humanity returned to the shadows not as conquerors but as guardians. Peace returned, respect endured, and the story of humanity's awakening became a quiet legend whispered across worlds. The humans are slumbering war gods, and someone had kicked the temple door. The temple stood quiet again for now,